and Diane Wilson. We'll be teaching about location, urban and rural beehives and honey plants. So looks like they're getting on there now.
You haven't unmuted us.
Okay. Hello.
Hello there.
Can you see us?
Can't see you. We can see your screen. Oh, for some reason it comes up Lenora.
Yeah, that she already presented.
I know.
Let's see.
There
Oh,
you
there
are.
we are. Hi there. I am Diane Wilson, and this is Connie Unzicker over here. So let's go. We are doing, I am sharing this screen. Apiary location and honey plants. And, okay, I am a little bit slow on this. And I apologize, but we will. So the first question is it legal wherever you are? Oh, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Because you will need to check your municipal codes to find out if you are legal. And the way to do that, I'm fixing this here. It's driving me crazy, guys. The way to do this is to go to municode.com, and that will, you can look up Missouri, and then we live in St. Joseph, Missouri, and I looked it up. Easy to find, and it tells what your city codes are. And you also need to check with your homeowners association, even if you're out in the county. A quick way to do it may be to call your county clerk. And when you're checking your codes, you may want to check under nuisance laws. I found St. Joseph's under animals. So this is basically what we are covering. It's talking about what you need to have a healthy hive. Number one, located in full sun. Full sun keeps the small hive beetles at bay. And when you are putting it in full sun, don't put it in a damp area or a low area. The rule is to always face your hive south or east or southeast. And the point of that is for a windbreak, especially in the wintertime. You want a stable foundation. So it needs to be level and elevated, at least 8 inches to a foot. That's good for you, and it's good for keeping critters out of your hive. You want it level side to side, and especially if you have a solid bottom board, to tilt it forward slightly in case rain does get in there so it doesn't sit in there, sit in your hive. If you have a screen bottom board, that's not so important, but the level side to side is important. Water nearby is so important, and easy, as well as easy access. We'll talk about that later. You want good ventilation around your hive, and then you need to consider what the bees are going to eat. So just going over a couple of things. These are empty storage hives, but imagine them if they were full of bees, because they are having to deal with a soft ground that's unlevel and wind. That is considerations. You need to make sure everything is level. These are good windbreaks, and these are pictures of a couple of our hives. The one on the left, the farmer, the first year did not put a windbreak around. We lost both hives. The second year, the farmer offered to put some hay bales around, and both hives made it through the winter. The one on the right is at a friend's house. the wind was, the shed is on the north side, so that's a good wind break. And he said, do you want me to put some, a bale of hay around that? And I said, well, that would be nice. So he did a super duper overkill job of surrounding this hive with bales of hay. That is overkill. You don't need to do that, but I just thought it was funny. So talking about foraging, you want the food as close as possible. You want Price Chopper to be 1 mile away, not 6 miles away. Bees will fly 4 miles, maybe 6 miles to get their food, but why in the world would we want to wear them out? So you want food not only for a short time, but for throughout the season. The fresh water is the important one, and that does need to be just really relatively close, like 1/4 of a mile. In the city, some of the ordinances say that the water needs to be within 25 feet. And there's a reason for that Connie will go over. There's some reasons why, what water does for the hive as far as regulating the temperature and raising the brood. And when we say fresh water, we just mean non-contaminated water. So it can be a pond or a creek. Or here's some other ideas, a bird bath basin or a faucet or a chicken feeder. But just know this, that bees do not drink on the fly. So they have to land in order to drink. You may have seen pictures of bees in a bird bath, and they're all along the edge of the bird bath. So if you have a rain barrel or a bucket out, you have to have rocks or floats in the bucket for the bees to land on, or the bees will just drown trying to drink. Putting a ladder in your rain barrel is a thought. So those are ideas for water, but they need water all the time. Between April and November. It is very important that you can get to your hive all year long. Of course, during honey harvest, you're going to have heavy loads of honey, but even in the late fall, and if you need to feed your bees in the winter, you need to be able to get to them. My rule of thumb is if I can't drive my truck there, then it's not a good place for bees. And so you have to ask yourself, do I have to get through gates and locked gates and fences? Do I have to go through tall grass to get to my bees? Then those are not good places to have them. Also know that I keep my bees away from the public eye as much as possible because I really don't want anybody going to visit them. And so think about who's going to see them, and if you're going to be a nuisance to them or if they are going to be a nuisance to you. One other thought is that livestock, if you are putting them on farm ground, livestock will use your beehives as scratching posts. So you have to protect your bees from cattle and from horses. And it's always a good thought to have written clearance if it's not on your property, and kind of have a discussion of, do the people expect honey? Because I always give the family where I have my hives honey, but do they expect a certain amount of honey? In the city, a lot of times it's mandated by city code that you have written permission as well. So this is just a picture of, I think this is just where some holding hives are, but it's also a good petri dish for pests, because these hives, the bees will drift and you can have all sorts of diseases. If you're out in the country, you have to think about 4-mile radius in case there is pesticides or herbicides being applied. You can go to driftwatch.org and sign up for where your hives are. If somebody is spraying, they can check and see if your hives are going to be close to where they are spraying. I have signed up for that and have never received any notifications, but you have to sign up every year. And so that may be worthwhile if you're out in the country. So these are some thoughts when you're configuring your hives. And I like to think of it as how you would tell your children to find your house when they are very young. So if you think all the houses look the same, what would you do to make your house stick out for your children so they don't end up at your neighbors? You paint it a different color, and color is good. I think Robert had mentioned about painting your hives, and you notice that a lot of hives are white. And of course they're white because in the summertime, those hives get hot. And so we want to help the bees by not having a really dark hive. However, color is good, and bees see color. They just see it a little bit differently than we do, but they see design. So get some bargain paint and paint away, and that will help your bees kind of know where their house is. Also, if you could, you would put your house on the curve and say, our house is, if you're talking to your kids, our house is in the middle of the curve. So that helps the bees as well. And using landscape markers. So fences, bushes, trees, anything like that to help. You're not going to put your hive under a tree, as it were, because you want it in the full sun, but using a tree as a marker. Connie and I put rocks on the top of each of our hives, and we name our hives, actually. We name our hives different bee plants, such as honeysuckle or honey locust or wild plum, and we have these rocks on the top, and we paint the picture of the plant on our rocks. I know that's a little bit of overkill, but you do need to be able to differentiate your hives so that when you're documenting about your hives, you know which ones you're talking about. So that's the kind of fun way, creative way we have kind of done it. Connie and I have done beekeeping that we're starting our 12th year, and we do it together, which is very wonderful because what I don't think of, she does. They mentioned pointing your hives in various directions as well, just knowing that in the wintertime, you don't want to point them north or west for that wind to bother them. So now Connie is going to be talking about
okay. Yeah, we'll just look at some of the differences. My beehives, I have 6 in my backyard, and I do live in a more urban area. We have close to an acre, and there is farmland near us for food sources. But the biggest difference between urban and rural is, of course, people close by. And so we'll do some different considerations for that. Bees are free range, and so you want to watch, as Diane had mentioned before, how many people are going to be close to it. If there's going to be kids playing, are you near a sidewalk where people walk? Those all come into consideration when you're placing your hives. In urban areas, there's a lot of mature flowering trees, so that's a pro as far as having your hives in an urban area. In rural areas, of course, you have the more open fields and natural forests and fewer restrictions for the bees. Urban beekeepers also have to deal with the chemicals that people put on their lawns, or your neighbor could have a bee allergy. And that is something definitely that would be bad about having bees in a more urban area. Rural beekeepers have to, again, as we mentioned before, deal with crop spraying and dusting. And also in the country, many times they have monocrops. And so there may not be as much variety as you think for them to feed. Next. Okay, so if you're putting your hives in the city, check for your permits, which we've mentioned. Make sure that your neighbors don't have any serious bee allergies. And also you have to consider how gentle your bees are in an urban setting, just because your neighbors may be closer and you don't want bees that are more aggressive. If you can do something about that, you might have to requeen at times. Fences are good, and oftentimes it's required to have fences around your hives as far as ordinances go. And so a bush can be a good barrier for them as well. The barrier should be 6 feet high and possibly 6 feet away from the entrance of the hive. That also affects the flight pattern of the bees as they come and go from the hive. If you have a fence that's higher there, then it creates a situation where the bees fly at a higher level. Also, make sure that your entrances are away from any sort of sidewalks and neighbors. As we mentioned before, I had neighbors that had a trampoline. And of course, when those kids were out jumping on their trampoline, it was 2 yards away, but I didn't go into the hives at that time. I would wait until nobody's around. Also, again, as Diane mentioned, you want plenty of water for the bees. And something, again, that you're going to run into in an urban area more than a rural area is that bees have a 72-hour memory. So if they find a good water source in a neighbor's pool, they're going to tell the rest of the hive, and you're going to have a lot of bees at that neighbor's pool side. And so it's really important that you have a good water source near your hives to discourage them from going over to the neighbor's pool. Also, just try to be a good neighbor. There's a picture of of animals that might be attracted to a hive. Go ahead. And also public drinking fountains are also a source of attraction for bees. We were out at Joshua Tree National Park, and they had a huge honeybee problem, or with honeybees gathering around the toilet areas, because that's a desert area in California, and that was a water source for the bees. And so on this national park property, they had placed buckets of water for the bees, and hoping that they would go to them some distance from the restroom areas. But that was a huge problem out there. Also, in a urban area, and we're talking downtown area, people have put bees on top of buildings. You may have heard of that. Something to consider is that you have light colored roof. A black tarred roof gets too hot. And also you have to make sure that the roof is strong, because that hive can get very heavy, and roofs have fallen through. We made a little illustration of an urban yard setup that one might consider. In the upper right-hand corner here, you have a garden, and herbs are a very good source of nectar and pollen for the bees. And there's a row of flowers. Also, the beehives are in the upper left-hand corner here, and they're facing in towards the yard. Hopefully that's a south-facing hive. And there's a bush, and a barrier of bushes behind and on the side of the hives to just kind of keep them isolated a little bit from your neighbors. And in this yard, we have a shed, and just keeping your equipment in that shed just keeps a nicer look for the bees. And then, of course, there's a water source. All right, so community education, that is a good way to be a good neighbor. Promote community benefits of honeybees. Instruct your neighbors. Let them know how honeybees help the environment. Give ways that your neighbors can help with the bees. Planting honey plants and putting out water if they want them there. And also talk to them about a swarm and what a swarm looks like. If they happen to have a swarm at their house, of course, you want to know about it and you want to go get it, especially if it's from your hive. And so educating your neighbors is important, or the people around you. And also if they know what a swarm looks like and what to expect and not to be afraid of it, that can help too. And they aren't as likely to spray it with something that will kill the bees. And also, you know, just dream. There's a lot of, again, very urban settings where bees are being kept. So keep in mind, happy bees are happy neighbors. And so when you're getting into the hive, avoid agitating them, respect the hive's instincts, practice good management. It pays to go to your beekeeping meetings and learning more. When you're getting into the hive, especially in the urban setting, you want to do it on a sunny day, as we mentioned before, as far as getting into the hive. Also, keeping the bees calm with the smoke and working calmly and efficiently helps. Also, when you're taking frames out of the hive, it's best to perhaps put them into a nuke or another area, and you want to close over the nuke in between the times that you're using it, so that the bees aren't agitated and they're not induced to rob. Also, avoid the top entrances, a hole on top of the hive if you're in the city, so that the beehive doesn't get more confused when you examine them. So anyway, keep current on your beekeeping skills and attend your meetings. It really does. It has helped us immeasurably. Mm-hmm. Also, again, we mentioned painting your hives different colors, store your clutter in a shed. If you're not using the equipment, it's good to have it in a bee-tight area. You will have bees robbing if there's some honey left on the equipment. And also discourage children playing just very close to the hives. I have lots of grandchildren and kids, and it's never been a problem as far as them being in the yard. If you're concerned about the bees, you know, after 4 o'clock is a better time to have people in the yard if the bees are going to be close than earlier in the day, because that's when they're beginning to get back into the hive for the evening. So here's just a picture of one of the scholarship students' hives. And there's another picture of a hive that's been painted. So just a thought. And then again, remember that it's good to share your harvest with your neighbors. And I do give my neighbors honey. They can have as much as they want. And also just sharing with them really does help with public relations in an urban setting. So now we are going to move on to bee plants. This is another. And I think Diane's going to give us.
So there are, as we all know, honeybees are wonderful pollinators, but then so are other insects, butterflies and moths, wasps, flies, and beetles. And all of these insects use either the pollen or the nectar from plants for either feeding themselves or feeding their brood. What varies is the insect mouth parts, and that determines what kind of flowers they can use. So honeybees are generalists, and they can populate a wide variety of flowers. That's why they're so useful. There are other insects and even other bees that are specialists, and they only can pollinate certain very specific amounts of flowers. So all of this is to say your gardens need to be very diverse. Just to let you know, most people love beekeepers. Some people do not, because they think that honeybees are pushing the other insects that are specialists and are natural to the area, because honeybees are not natural to the United States. So they feel like we are pushing out the specialists. However, so if you come across that, as a rule, people love beekeepers. So this is what 3 things you need to consider when you're thinking about plants. So your choices, and are they good for honeybees? And you need to have a good blooms across the season, and then how close is the grocery store, essentially. So when you're thinking about plant choices, don't just think flowers, think trees, shrubs, bushes, and bees get different things from different plants. So they need propolis, they use this, that's bee glue, and they use it for housekeeping and sealing up their hive, and they usually get that from tree bark. They need nectar for the honey, and they need pollen for brood breeding. And actually the mycelium of mushrooms to give them nutrients. And I kind of found this by accident, but if you will Google mushrooms and bees, you will come across a Dr. Paul Stamets, and he talks about how he has found bees. He's a mycologist, and how he has found bees in his mycelium, and he thinks that they are getting the nutrients. And he has several products actually to help beekeepers. All of that is to say, the short story is, if you have timber close to you, or wood piles, or anything, any kind of dead wood near you, you probably have mycelium growing, and that could be good nutrients for your bees as well. So there are a few plants, and here I am saying to avoid, actually bees just don't like them, and they don't make very good honey. So hybrid plants, as a rule, lack good pollen and nectar. So just keep that in mind. And you can buy hybrids and a lot of different plants, or you can, so just watch that. And then rhododendrons, I put my first hives right next to my big rhododendron, thinking that the bees would love them, and they totally avoided them. So what do bees see? Bees have, as Tom mentioned, 5 eyes and 2 big compound eyes, and they see so much better than we do, but they do not see the red spectrum very well. So if you're old and you remember Roy G. Biv, the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet color spectrum, bees see on the Biv part, the blue, indigo, violet part of the spectrum, and they also see UV light. And that is what is so wonderful about bees. We've been told for years that bees see the color red as black. I haven't verified that lately, but bees do see flowers totally different than we do. And it's because of the UV light that the flower absorbs. So on the left is what we see, and on the right is what the bee sees. And you can see on the daisies on the bottom, it's almost like a landing strip where the flower is pointing the bee toward where the pollen and the nectar is. So bees see wonderfully well. So I'm saying paint those hives different colors. So Connie's going over some of the
All right. Looking at different blooms across the season, and we just have a short list of possible flowers that you would see in the spring and summer and fall. But a good source of information is the Lady Bird Johnson Wildlife Center at the University of Texas. And you can see there is www.wildflower.org is how you find this. And I'll tell you, you can search. It's just wonderful because they have a section of flowers that are good for honeybees. And you can put in what your state, the light requirement that you have in your area, where you're wanting to plant, the soil, what time you want the blooms. Again, it's good to have blooms across the seasons. And so this is a wonderful source for wildflowers and other plants that your bees would love. In the early spring, and right now, the maples are not yet blooming, but if you have a maple tree nearby, take a look, because the branches are beginning to swell and they're just about ready to bloom, at least here in St. Joseph. So early spring, you have your maple trees, your crocus, you have your fruit trees, apple trees, you have clover that begins to bloom, dandelions and hellebores. You'll see them working some plants at some times and other plants at other times. And then in late spring, summer, we have elderberries that bloom, blueberries. Now that is a very deep blossom, but when I have looked it up, they do pollinate blueberry bushes. There are allium and thistle, the fennel plants, your herbs, and astilbes. Russian sage in the summer is a wonderful source of nectar for the bees. And as we get towards fall, the goldenrods begin to bloom. And that is a honey that I have read. Well, we actually experienced it. We had a hive that apparently was working the goldenrod, and that honey smelled like dirty gym shoes. It was terrible. It had a locker room smell. But I did read in one of my beekeeping magazines that can be a sought after honey for some people. But anyway, goldenrod is a good source. And then in the fall, your sedums, I've seen them just covering my stonecrop sedum in the fall. Common holly, cornflowers, sunflowers, some of the plants that bloom later in the season are wonderful as the hive prepares for winter and begins to store up their supplies. Just keep in mind that, again, bees do pollinate a wide variety of plants, but the tongue or proboscis is only about 1/4 inch long. And so if you have a very deep bell-shaped bloom, that they are not as likely to get into that, especially if it's narrow because of the length of their tongue. So good plants for butterflies aren't necessarily good for bee plants. So that ends our talk. Any questions?
There were a few questions on here about mowing, and I think they've been answered.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Chris. I have a question. What kind of quantities are you looking like to support a hive? I mean, if I plant sunflower, am I looking at planting a dozen sunflowers or 100 sunflowers to support a hive? What's better?
Boy, and that will just be a certain, part of the season that sunflower will even be available.
Right.
And you know what? I don't know the answer to that. Like how many sunflowers per hive? That would be an interesting thing to try to find out.
I mean, I imagine the more the better, but I would guess that there's probably a minimum amount that helps support the hive.
Right. Sure. And of course, the bees are going to be foraging well beyond our gardens and what we've put out there. So, just looking around your general area, even up to a mile, out, and being sure that there's a variety of plants is a good source. And late summer is what they call a dirge. You'll get to a period of time when the nectar sources are pretty limited for the hive. And So if you can find plants, or hopefully if there are some rain periods that cause more plants to bloom, that's important for the hive too in terms of feeding.
So that was going to be my question, because I am in a metro area and I just don't know. I mean, it's not like I've gone around and surveyed my neighbors' yards. And I know my 3 acres is not going to be enough to sustain them. So have you ever had a problem with them having enough in a metro area?
So far, I haven't. Again, I do have, you know, some farmland that's relatively close to us, but you know, I live in a neighborhood that has acre lots, and I haven't had any trouble. We've gotten good honey crops off of our hives in my area, and I haven't run into that. I think they're pretty aggressive about finding their food, you know.
Okay.
And
well,
so it doesn't all depend on what you plant or what you have available. You know, they're going to get out there and get it.
We'll have to see. Connie has a hive at her neighbors, and they
Can't hear you.
Connie has a hive at her neighbors, and they are wonderful about planting wildflowers, and they have a garden. But I would say their wildflowers and their gardens are less than 1/4 of an acre, and they gave us 3.5 full honey supers last year. So that I have never read how much it will sustain a hive, but I have watched that hive on 1/4 acre of vegetables and wildflowers give us 3.5 acre or 3.5 supers of honey.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. They've done real well. So,
well, any other questions? On a side note, the interesting about urban, I've read some articles that there's actually better beekeeping source or nectar source for bees in urban areas than in rural areas, because rural areas so much of the monoculture.
Yeah.
In the cities, you have a lot more flowers and stuff out there for them.
Yeah, I would think that would be very true. Mm-hmm.
And there's a question here: are marigolds good bee flowers?
I've seen the bees working my marigolds. So
okay.
yeah.
Hope that answers the question. I don't see any others. Thank you, ladies. I really appreciate it. You guys do a great job as usual. There was a question about some regulations in Kansas City. I put some links in the chat box where you can go to look for rules. Yeah, it's quite different. Kansas City, there's no limit unless they're a nuisance. In other cities, you can't have any. So it depends on.
Yeah, we did check out, Diane checked out Independence. I think they may have changed their regulations. Wasn't it Independence that didn't allow any bees?
Yeah, they allow, depending on the size of the acreage, you can have some.
Oh, okay.
And I live in Independence, and I looked it up before I did all this. You have to have 3 acres minimum.
Wow.
And I think it has to be zoned RA also.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had some experience with that, some of our members.
Great.
And I've met with the city of Independence at least once on that. Yeah.
All right, okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Need to move on. The next one is going to be Hannah Gephardt. As I mentioned earlier, she's our past honey ambassador for the Missouri State Beekeeper Association, and she's kind enough to present for us today. So Hannah, we'll turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm so glad I get to be here with you guys virtually.
There's Hannah.
There she